Footsteps echo in the hollow night. Street lights flicker like they're scared of the fight. In my chest, a fire, no peace to find, the beast inside it claws my mind. Crimson shadows dance in my head, a thousand screams of words left unsaid. I walk the line where the living tread, one step closer, the hunger's fed. Mirror cracked, my reflection's alive. Eyes like razors cutting the sky. Fingers twitching, my hands are tied, but the urge is a flood I can't deny. Crimson shadows dance in my head, a thousand screams of words left unsaid. I walk the line where the living tread, one step closer, the hunger's fed. Whispers crawl like snakes in my brain, every heartbeat pounding like rain. Is it madness or just my chain? The desire rises, sweet and insane. Crimson shadows dance in my head, a thousand screams of words left unsaid. I walk the line where the living tread, one step closer, the hunger's fed.
All right. Happy Wednesday still. Thank you for joining me. My name is 12 Gauge, and this is my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. You know, today we had a short and sweet restitution hearing. I'm going to play it here in a minute. And then we're going to discuss it a little bit. You know, sometimes we all hear something different. Sometimes we hear things the same. And sometimes what we hear, we don't understand. So I watched it the first time around and I thought, what is this about really? Is it about power and control? Is it about wanting to get your way even though you're still locked up? Is it a ploy to eventually go back on what you pled? Let's listen to the hearing and let's see if we can understand what direction Brian Koberg and his team are trying to maneuver. Shall we? Come join me. And here we go. Let me speed this up a little bit. As we see there, everybody is there except the rest of Bill Thompson's team. It is Eliza Massoff, Ann Taylor, and Becca Barlow, and of course, Bill
All right,
Thompson.
let's go on the record in State v. Koberger, CR 0124316665. The defendant has been excused from today's proceedings. It is not present. The defense is represented by Ms. Massoff, Ms. Taylor, and Ms. Barlow. State is represented by Mr. Thompson. This is a time set for a hearing on the state's supplemental request for restitution. The state can argue first.
Thank you, Your Honor. The attached documentation, it doesn't appear that there's a question about the amounts. I think the question that has been raised is whether the propriety of any additional restitution being ordered at this point. Yesterday afternoon, we did receive a supplemental filing from the defense, and I want to respond to that just for the record before I address the merits of the restitution requests themselves. As we indicated in our response to the defense objection to the additional restitution request, at the time that we entered into the plea agreement, Ms. Jennings and I were under the impression that crime victims' compensation could be available to cover reimbursement of travel expenses. And I have to clarify that now. It is true that before trial, the families approached our office asking if there were any resources we were available to pay in advance for travel expenses or expenses related to them attending trial itself. And we looked into that, our staff looked into that, and advised them no. It was my understanding, and I'm mistaken, I realized I was mistaken at this point, but it was my understanding back in early July, late June, when we were talking about the plea agreement, that crime victims compensation could be available to reimburse expenses like that. I now know that's not correct, and it was certainly my mistake. I will own it as far as our state of mind going into the plea agreement.
So
that being said,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish the point on the plea agreement, and I have a question for you about that.
And I was just finishing that point, Your Honor, so this would be a good time.
Okay. So
So he's saying that back in July, it was his understanding that the individual would not have the ability to pay certain things, but yet at that point, they all had an agreement, a contractual agreement, that certain things would be made a deal with the defendant, and these would be the stipulations in which he would follow. One thing that's confusing to me is, did they add the funeral expenses after the fact? Because to me, it sounds like the funeral expenses were added in the original plea deal, but the earns were added after the fact. At least that's what I heard, but I could be wrong. And if that occurred, I mean, how can you be holding one person to a plea agreement, which is a contract that everybody signed, including the judge, and then later on come back and add a couple more things? Whether it just earns or not, still you're basing the contract, it's like bidding for a job, okay, bidding for a house job, construction. You say, well, this is what I want, and this is the price in which I want to pay. And then you sign the contract, and then you start working on it. And then while you're working on it, they say, well, is there any way that you can add this little piece or that little piece? It's almost like they're wanting you to add work without adding to the price of pay. At least that's what I got from this. Let's see if that's exactly true or not.
it's pretty well settled that plea agreements are interpreted as contracts, which they are. I think it's pretty well settled contract law that a unilateral mistake does not relieve one of its contractual obligations and restrictions. So how can I how can I order this restitution if the express terms of the plea agreement, though mistaken understanding by the state, don't allow such extra crime victims compensation fund reimbursement?
Your Honor, I recognize that, and that's what I was just getting ready to address. In response to the defense's objection, the state has modified or adjusted our position on the restitution. We are, pursuant to the plea agreement, seeking restitution for the funeral-related expenses, which are the urns that are described in Exhibit 2 to our response. We are not affirmatively advocating for the travel expenses and lodging expenses of the family because we do not believe that we can legally advocate for those. At the same time, the families provided those to us, and we want to provide them to the court and counsel just so everybody was aware that they are there, but we are not arguing affirmatively for that because of the wording of the plea agreement itself. So,
well, usually restitution is written in stone. You know, you say, well, this is what you're going to pay. This is the court cost. This is travel. This is this. This is that. And you sign as if, you know, this is what you understand. For some reason, you don't understand it, or you don't want to go and continue to be liable for that, then you don't add, or you don't go along with it. You don't say, well, yeah, this is what I'm going to be able to do. And then later on say, no, this is not what I'm able to do. I'm not paying it. I mean, at this point, it's just a moot point for the prosecution and the defense. This is just a waste of taxpayers' money, because I believe that Mr. Hippler is going to come back and say, you know, this was the plea agreement. This is what you pled out to. This is what you signed. You're bound by this, or you're going to be in violation of the plea agreement. And if you're in violation, do we need to go back to court and null and void the plea agreement and take you back to court and drop the plea agreement and let you face the consequences of a trial?
So what the state is actually requesting today is just additional restitution for the funeral-related expenses, which are the urns for the families.
Okay, thank you. And you can address the other issues as well.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, which other issues?
Well, the issues, if you would like, raised in opposition to your motion, including the lack of ability to pay by a defendant and et cetera.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I apologize. The defendant has raised the issue of his alleged inability to pay, and we recognize that he's going to be incarcerated until he dies. But that in and of itself doesn't mean that over the course of the balance of his life, he might become, he might receive assets. And in fact, we attached a breakdown of the types of monies that he has received during his incarceration. We also noted the statute that allows the treasurer to intercept prospective monies that might be received based on any attempted publication of the story of the defendant. And those, if received, would be something.
And I heard somebody say earlier about, well, the money that he had before the restitution should not be an issue because he hadn't taken the plea agreement yet. And that kind of makes sense, but it kind of doesn't. At the same time, whatever you go to prison with, that money is the money that you should be paying your restitution. In his case, you're going to hear here in a minute a little loophole that he was trying to, for the lack of a better word, use to be able to keep a lot of the money that he has accumulated, either A, from a anonymous donor, or his family was sending him money up to 5 figures. So we'll see exactly what Mr. Koberger is trying to do.
That a restitution order could be enforced against. We also note that the language of the statute and the case law interpreting the restitution statute, which is 1953-04, if I believe off the top of my head, talks about current inability to pay is not necessarily a block to the order of restitution. It's just merely a factor for the court to consider. And it is our position, given the relative youth of the defendant, the fact that he has been receiving significant monies during his incarceration already, and that there is a possibility of future monies, whether by virtue.
There, he just said it. He said he'd been receiving money during his incarceration. So I'm not going to ruin it for you based on what the judge is about to say, but think about that a minute. If you've been receiving this amount of money throughout your incarceration, and then you plead, and this is what you plead to: we're going to do this, the prosecution going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to offer you this, they're going to take this off if you do this. This is what you'll be bound by. So let's see what the judge says.
Of the statute, with the treasurer impounding proceeds from a story related to this, or perhaps from an inheritance from his family or others. We can't see into the future. We don't have a perfect crystal ball. The state's position is having this additional restitution place, which is really fairly minimal, would be appropriate, and have them available that if the defendant comes into assets, that the families would be able to try to satisfy the restitution orders from them.
Thank you. And then who's arguing for defense?
I will be, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you. Given that the state has clarified its position that it's only seeking reimbursement for the earns, it's my understanding that that amount is $1,420 for one family, $1,587.79, and then another $167.79, which would be a total, I believe, if my math is right, of $3,075.58. My understanding of reading the Victims Compensation Code 1953-04 is that the court must still do an analysis on Mr. Koberger's ability to pay. And as the state has addressed, we are arguing that he does not have an ability to pay. While there have been lump sums provided to you regarding some funds that he received prior to his plea agreement, what the court does not have is a breakdown of how those funds came into the inmate system for his expenses and the fact that they were primarily family. Certainly his situation pre-plea and sentencing was drastically different than it is right now in terms of money that is available to him. And there's nothing in the record to provide the court with anything other than what is really speculation based on the past, as opposed to something that the court might be able to rely upon about foreseeability. There's no way that Mr. Koberger is ever going to profit from any sort of movie or book, because Idaho Code 1953-01 specifically precludes that.
Well,
and
it allows that monies are swept from his account for those income to pay certain things. If those certain things, if there's no debt for those certain things, then
So what he's saying is, if it allows for certain things to be done, let's say that Brian does not write a book, okay? Because there's this son of Sam law, okay? Let's say he doesn't write a book. Let's say that none of that happens. But somebody in his family sells his story and then gets some money from it. Sells an interview, tells their side of the story, and then with that money, they put that on Brian's book. So that is still, it sounds like to me that they're trying to eliminate any possible financial influx to keep him from having to pay the restitution. I mean, honestly, to be fair, Brian should have just not even contested any of this and just not paid. If he wasn't going to pay, he wasn't going to pay. I mean, in reality, most of the time, just like the family said, they don't expect a dime because they know he's not going to pay. They know he's not going to pay. So for him to contest is merely just like a way to keep his story active, because he knows people are watching this. He knows people are sending him money. Whether the anonymous actor eventually gets found out or not, that's to be seen in the future based on the judge's ruling in the end.
does the money not go then to the defendant?
That is not my reading of the code. Perhaps I'm reading that statute more broadly than the court is. I understood it to be that the purpose is that someone can't then profit off of their crime pursuant to that statute. I guess I need to read it with
Well, even
that broad
allowing your
implication.
even allowing your reading of it, what's to prevent, for example, a family member from agreeing to, provide information, be a part of, et cetera, a story, movie, book, whatever, TV series about the murders, about Mr. Koberger, and that certainly wouldn't be monies they receive wouldn't be subject to the statute, and then they certainly would be free to send Mr. Koberger money to his account. What harm is it to order the restitution, which would then sort of jump in line in terms of priority of payments over some of the other ordered payments, such that if Mr. Koberger does receive money into his accounts from any source, that he's then, that those monies are then put to that use. Certainly, we're not worried about Mr. Koberger's credit rating with having debts at this point. I'm not sure what the concern would be to, given the uniqueness of this case and the potential for family members, et cetera, to earn money from it.
See, and that was my understanding as well, is, what does it really impact on his end? If he does get money, you have bills, you got to pay. I mean, that's part of it. Court costs, all the DNA testing, all the stuff that we have seen in the documents, that is all the money that is wrapped around in the plea deal, because you know what? It costs money to investigate a crime. And when you're found out that you're the one that's guilty, especially when you plead out, that means you're taking responsibility for the financial aspect of it. you're taking accountability for the criminal aspect of it, and you're taking accountability for all of your actions. And it sounds like this man has never had to take accountability for much in his life because he's used to being in control. He's used to being the one calling the shots. And if you haven't figured that out yet throughout these whole 3 years, I don't know where you've been. And once again, this is not about guilt or innocence anymore. This is about him still wanting to be the one in control. If he keeps playing these games long enough, and he is to be found to be in contempt of this plea agreement, we could be watching something else unfold in the future, I believe.
And potentially we've seen members of the public send money to Mr. Kohlberger, is my understanding, to his books. What's the downside to ensuring that the victims are as whole as possible from this by ordering the restitution, which again would jump in line from some of the other court-ordered fines, et cetera. And if the money's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not.
Judge, I don't see that Idaho code or Idaho law asks the court to make an analysis on the downside, but whether or not there is foreseeability of payment. And all of the things that you just listed are pure speculation. There is no book or movie that's in the works by any of his family. And to say that those things are going to happen is absolutely speculative, and there's nothing to substantiate those sorts of assertions happening in the future. So
Well, there's a history in the 3 years he was incarcerated of him receiving 5 figures put on his books. Doesn't that give the court some history to suggest that such contributions from whatever source may continue into the future?
as I stated earlier, Judge, that was at a different time in the case. That was at a time when, he had not entered a plea. He was not deemed convicted of the crime. The money, a lot of that money was coming from his family to be able to have communications with their son and brother. And to speculate that those kinds of dollars are going to be able to have.
So, okay, there's a solution to that. If you want to say that all that money was being sent, excuse me, to him by his family before he was convicted. Okay, let's go with that. When was the last payment sent to him before the conviction, before he signed the plea deal? And then how much money had he been receiving after he took the plea deal? And what was his balance going into prison after he accepted the plea deal? That would tell you, okay, from this moment on, this is how much money you had. This is how much money's been coming in. Because the treasurer obviously has flagged not only his, but everybody's who has restitution, and any kind of monetary value that you receive goes toward that restitution, especially if you signed off on it, because it's a contract. It's saying that you agree to do certain things. So to say, okay, well, everything before he was convicted was his money. Okay, let's be fair. After the fact, whatever money he entered into the prison with, then we're talking a different story. So let's go from there.
Happen for the next many decades is exactly that. It's pure speculation, not based on something that is foreseeable or based in something that's in fact before this court.
Well, it just seems to me that one of the, really, obviously, even application of statute requires the court to look at what might happen into the future. And I guess it seems to me one of the best indicators of the future is the past. And in the past, his family has, you're saying the family was the source of much of these funds, has provided him funds in order for him to communicate, et cetera. That necessity will still exist going forward. I'm not aware of his family having disowned him at this point and not wanting any contact with him. And even if they are, that doesn't mean that won't change. And you call it speculation. It seems to me that it is good evidence of what may occur in the future in light of what has occurred in the past.
Well, Judge, there is a judgment against him in the amount of $28,000, and certainly 20% of every dollar that goes into his inmate account is going to go towards paying that $28,000. Another factor that the court actually can look at under 1953-04 subsection 7 is other factors, and those factors that other factors that the court deems appropriate, and that can be collateral resources that the families obtained over $200,000, which definitely reimburse the cost of the earns in terms of economic costs.
I also want to turn to the plea agreement, because isn't a reasonable interpretation of the plea agreement that the defendant will not contest the state's seeking of restitution that is outlined in the plea agreement? Otherwise, why would it need to be in the plea agreement? It seems to me it's the plea agreement, a reasonable interpretation is the defendant is agreeing to pay restitution for those items that are identified in the plea agreement, which includes victims' compensation, which includes in this case funeral expenses. So you took advantage of the plea agreement to get the benefit of the bargain regarding the state's dropping of the death penalty. Why should you not be held to the plea agreement to pay the victims the costs of interning their children?
I mean, he makes a good point there. He took advantage of them taking the death penalty off by pleading out. He asked for the plea agreement. So if you're asking for a plea agreement and this is what contractually you're bound to, you can't very well go back and say, well, no, I'm only going to do part of this, the part that benefits me. And as you notice, Ann Taylor didn't say much, if nothing, at this hearing at all. And I wonder why.
Judge, I believe that our pleading was clear, that we understood that earns fell underneath a funeral cost, but that once we have a hearing on this matter, that doesn't eliminate the court's duty under 1953-04 to do the ability to pay analysis. And that's why.
Are you in violation of the plea agreement by arguing that your client shouldn't have to pay those?
We are not in violation of the plea agreement. If there was any violation of the plea agreement that took place, it's the state seeking this when the other expenses, when it was clear under statute and under the Idaho Victims Compensation rules that those were not reimbursable expenses.
But they've effectively withdrawn those requests and are seeking what's outlined in the plea agreement. What's the point of the plea agreement on restitution if the defense is able to argue against the restitution called for in the plea agreement itself?
Judge, again, in our pleading, we objected to what the state has withdrawn as of this moment at this hearing today.
Right.
We acknowledge that the earns were funeral expenses.
Right.
But once we're in this situation of having a hearing, then this other section about whether or not he has an ability to pay is triggered. We stipulated to $28,000 in restitution within 60 days.
Right.
He met the terms of the plea agreement.
But it also says the state may seek restitution regarding funeral expenses, and they're simply identifying additional funeral expenses.
I don't know what more you want me to say about the earns other
Well,
than
what's
they
the point
are-
of the plea agreement if you're
agreed.
not going
I
to be
laid
bound
out
by
the-
it?
I agreed that it was $3,075.58.
But you say you just shouldn't have to pay it.
What I said was that the court needs to do the analysis under Idaho code about his ability to pay.
Why
And it doesn't-
hasn't the defendant waived his right to rely on that ability to pay by agreeing to those expenses as part of the plea agreement?
I don't know how the court can enter this order today without engaging in the analysis under Idaho code because it's required. That's the way I review the case law and the code, that once there's a hearing about restitution, then the court has to engage in the analysis on the ability to pay.
So the agreement to pay is illusory.
No, he agreed to $28,000. We've agreed that earns fall underneath.
Does he have the ability to pay that?
No, he does not have the ability.
So
to
why
pay
did
that,
you
but
agree
it
to
was-
it?
Because it was a specific, we were provided with those receipts.
Got it right there. Why would you agree to something if you don't have the ability to pay it? Because he was trying to take advantage of the plea agreement. It's like at that point, they would have offered him to run 10 miles a day. Hell, he would have said yes. But once he's thought about it a little bit, it's like, no, I'm not going to do this. I don't know what your thoughts are on it. Once again, I am not putting my thoughts in on this because, you agree to a contract, you should be held to a contract. And if you're in violation of the contract, then there are consequences.
Receipts within 60 days. We were not provided with the receipt for the earns within 60 days.
So is your objection then a timeliness objection?
We did raise a timeliness objection in our pleading. I have thought about that and whether or not I think that it is a really valid argument to say that that's completely jurisdictional. I didn't to mean that the court can't take this under the review at this point in time. I didn't read the judgment language in such a strict fashion that
I mean, it just seems like this has been the whole MO of the whole case. It's like, we're going to present this, but then we're going to, when the judge starts holding us to what we need to be doing, then we're going to start backpedaling and not really bring an argument substantial to get our point across. And that shows in every aspect of this whole case regarding his defense. People say they weren't very good, they like this, they like that. Well, they did manipulate the state into offering the plea deal. And now they continue to want their way.
I felt like we could say 61 days means the court's not going to consider it at all. So it is past your 60-day deadline, but I don't know that that is completely jurisdictional in the way that you drafted your judgment.
Anything else?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, any rebuttal?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll take the matter under advisement, issue an opinion in due course.
I mean, honestly, you don't blame his team for trying to fight for what he wants because they are his team, right? But at the same time, you have to understand there's certain things that they can't fight against. Let's see what this one has to say.
4 Idaho college students admits he did it. Yesterday, Brian Koberger pleaded guilty in a deal that will allow him to avoid the death penalty. Prosecutors say he sneaked into an off-campus rental home in Idaho and stabbed 4 students to death 3 years ago. Koberger was arrested several weeks later in Pennsylvania after a manhunt. Prosecutors say his DNA was found on a knife sheath at the crime scene.
Bobby Tagavi is a former prosecutor for the Orange County District Attorney's Office. Now, he also worked on the Golden State Killer case, and this morning he is here to break down all the latest developments in the Koberger case. Good morning, Bobby. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's get right to it, Bobby. We would like to ask you, why did prosecutors decide to strike a plea deal? Because we know there was a lot of evidence against him.
Yeah, you know, when you're a trial lawyer, there's always going to be a moment where you have this decision on whether or not you want to make an offer and settle the case, or you want to take it to trial and take your chances with the jury. And you have to kind of look at the evidence, both can I prove that this guy did it? Legally, am I going to be able to get past an appeal process? And if I settle the case, did I settle it for what's fair and just for the clients? And in this case, the prosecutors made those determinations, I think, based on the fact that they didn't have real direct evidence that Koberger actually committed the crime. So it was very circumstantial through DNA and cell phone towers. But they didn't really have an admission. They don't have anyone putting him at the crime scene. They never found the murder weapon. And legally with the DNA, there was definitely some uncharted territory that they had to navigate through. And I think that's kind of what made him make the decision.
Interesting. So as you mentioned, because of this plea deal, then the case doesn't go to trial, which also happens, we understand, in the Golden State Killer case. How does this impact, though, closure for the families? Because we understand 2 of the families of the victims objected to this plea deal. They didn't want to see this happen. Yeah,
you know, closure, I think, is very personal to every victim and every victim's family. And when I was a prosecutor, you know, I had victims that felt like they needed a verdict, and others that were like, I don't want to go through the trial. I just want to put it behind me and be able to mourn the loss of my loved ones. With the prosecutors, they have an obligation to talk to the victims. They have an obligation to inform them of what their decision is. But in a criminal case, unlike in a civil case, the victim's not your client. Your client's the state of California or the state of Idaho in this case. So
And also during this whole thing, you know, people have been arguing whether this case was winnable. Based on everything that we've been shown and everything that continues to drop on a daily basis, it seems like almost, the case was not as strong, but it was not unwinnable based on what kind of jury you were going to have. And we didn't get that opportunity. We didn't get the opportunity to see the jury selection. We didn't get the opportunity to hear the opening statements, the parts of the evidence and how they put the evidence together. No, all we get to see is this is what we were working on. It's kind of like we're going to show you what we were working on, but yet we're going to leave it up for interpretation. So it's almost like the stuff that we've been shown, it's useless unless you know how it was going to be pieced together, what parts of it were actually going to be worth any kind of value in the trial. Because I can almost guarantee you everything we've been shown was not everything was going to make it into the trial, if probably 5% of it was. But individuals believe that everything that we've been shown was going to make it in the trial. And by individuals, I say people in the true crime community. They believe that what we've been shown, there was such inconsistencies that it would have mattered in the long run. And I heard Bill Thompson make a comment when he was asked about what made him go ahead and accept the plea. And it almost like He had the defendant coming to him asking for a plea deal to take the death penalty off the table. Did the defendant at that point feel that he was going to lose the trial potentially? Did he feel like he was going to be sentenced to death at that point? Did he feel like his case wasn't winnable? I don't know about you, but if I truly, at any point, denied doing this, there's no way in hell I would have taken that plea deal. I would have rolled the dice and went all out for my freedom. The fact that this man did not do that and was able to say so quickly, yes, I will take the plea deal and I will cop to the 4 murders and the burglary without batting an eye. And I don't have to tell you why I did it, where the knife is, where the clothes are, none of that. All I got to do is cop to it. Okay, I'll take it. Some people disagree with the plea deal. They state just like what I'm stating, if you're truly innocent, if you truly have nothing to do with the crime, what makes you admit to something that you didn't do? We've seen crime scene photos up to this point. We've seen blurred out images of the crime scene. We've heard of multitudes of where certain things were placed, what kind of evidence they discovered, what kind of evidence they did not discover. We've seen the car in pieces. We've seen the car photographed as it was dusted for prints, and there was this and that. But what people don't understand, it's not like they caught this man the next day. Not like they caught him a week later. It's not like they caught him 2 weeks later. It was almost a month later where this man had the ability to continue to clean his tracks, to be able to get rid of evidence, almost to the point where they had even less at that point than when they were putting the circumstantial evidence together to even arrest him. I don't know the misunderstanding of people's beliefs when they say, well, they didn't have any evidence against him or the evidence they had was flimsy. I get that because I've doubted that from the beginning myself. You know, I've doubted that myself because there's a lot of things that don't make sense. There's a lot of things that don't make sense in this case. Every interview, every document that you see certain things be backtracked or people not understanding or remembering, or like earlier, I was watching Dylan's testimony with her attorney. I'm going to shut that off because he really just gets into the plea deal and his interpretation. But think about that a minute. Even with Dylan's testimony with her attorney, which was days later or whatever, at her home, she still was not very clear on what was being asked of her. So if you look at that and you have that mindset, okay, well, Dylan didn't have a clue what she was talking about. She was backtracking. She was all over the place. I've come to find out in my mind that Dylan is the worst eyewitness of all time. The only thing that she's really seen is based on what she believes she saw. So you can't fabricate, you can't lie about what the witness stated. You have to go with what exactly she stated. So the fact that she said she saw certain things, she saw them. How can you doubt that? Just as just as if it would have been the other way around. If she would have been giving testimony that was exculpatory toward this defendant, how could you have argued that fact? So it has to go both ways when you look at an investigative technique and witness statements. Is you're never going to get a witness, two or three witnesses to agree on the same thing that they saw. It's not going to be a perfect story. If it is, then it's been collaborated by all the people in unison to tell the same story. And that didn't happen in this case. These people had different stories, different pieces that they remember. But I believe the most incriminating was the CCTV footage. And we've yet to see any of the pings or how they got those pings. Is there other footage showing him and tying him CCTV wise to those pings? So, if that's any part of the evidence that's coming up, you can't tell me that that's not critical in this case. I can take, that you don't believe the night of the murder, how there's so many inconsistencies and so many people involved and so many people so closely together. The DoorDash driver, the time frames, and everything else in between. I get that. But that's being one dimensional. You have to understand that they looked at months, almost 6 months back. So looking back 6 months, how much camera footage do they have of him taking the same route to this residence? Do they have the same cameras that could collaborate with his phone pings to actually show you, well, he was here around that residence at this time. Here's the camera footage. And here's the car without the front plate. So you have to ask yourself, is there more things than what were being shown? Or did they even dive that far? Because it looks like they only went so far as this investigation. Once they saw the white Elantra, it seems like they went in that direction. Because the avenues that they were going, they were coming up with dead ends. And I understand that people have questions about when they had his name, how soon they had his name. In the scheme of an investigation, does it really matter whether you had his name a week later and you're telling the public you didn't have it until this date? That shows the inexperience of the public to not understand that the police are able to lie and it's not a crime. I learned that very early on in my studies that the police are allowed to lie. And just as you've heard, for the sake of the investigation. So there's still multitudes of individuals that state that these are important factors that show the cover up, that shows corruption, that shows all these things. But really, is it that, or is it the fact that the police were basically trying to keep whoever was culpable for this crime to not know that they were really closer to them than they were letting on. Because in reality, when you're chasing a criminal, why would you disclose every piece of evidence that you have against this person? You know, if certain things were discussed and then you interview the individual that you suspect and they give you a piece of information that you don't have disclosed to the public, then you know, okay, how could this person have any understanding that this was part of the crime scene? It hasn't been released by anybody. So how would he know this? And we're not prevalent to that because there was a gag order so quickly in the case. And I do have an understanding that that gag order didn't protect anybody. That gag order didn't mean that he got a fair trial because he didn't even go to trial. It was one big circus after the other. It was one big smokescreen after the other. Just kind of like this restitution hearing. Was there really anything resolved? No. It just seemed like the judge was able to try to be as objective as possible without sounding like he was siding with the prosecution. Because in reality, when you make a contract with somebody, you're bound by that contract. So what will happen if he doesn't want to pay? I don't know that far in advance if there is much that they can issue other than saying, hey, you got to pay it or we're going to, take so much money of the influx of money that you get. I mean, if the families, they keep throwing the families in there. If the families really wanted closure, you know, they'd be like, okay, let's just quit asking for stuff. Let's just move on. Let's just move on. Let's let this guy's name die, just like he will one day. And the innocence part of it, could this man be innocent? At this point, we can't say yes because, like I said, what kind of sane individual would stand up there and admit to what he admitted to? You wouldn't do it. I know I wouldn't do it. And I know there's countless people listening that wouldn't do it, regardless of whether you felt they had you over a barrel or not. You would be fighting for your freedom for dear life. But for whatever reason, this individual either felt like he couldn't win with the jury or he just didn't want to die. That was his whole priority, was not dying. Because from day one, that's what it felt like the defense was worried about, was the death penalty. Because that's what we heard from day one. Her motion after motion after motion. And another thing is individuals really don't understand that the defense and the prosecution, they sit together and they discuss these cases. There's no kind of espionage that goes on, that the defense only has so much information and the prosecution only has so much information and all this. The discovery is discoverable by both parties. Everything about the crime, they both walked through the crime scene. They both walked through his apartment. They both walked through every piece of evidence other than being in Pennsylvania. I don't think they went to Pennsylvania to walk through his parents' home. But as far as all the stuff in the surrounding area, Pullman, Moscow, they were there together, looking at the crime scene, looking at his apartment, looking at everything that would later be deemed as evidence. So Anne knew what she was looking at. Bill knew what he was looking at. Even before the discovery shit, all that is just the logistics of the case. So to say that the prosecution was hiding stuff or trying to get one over, the defense attorney walked through the same crime scene. She saw the same evidence. She saw his apartment. She saw all the things that the prosecution saw. So there was no secrets. Just like in every investigation, there is no secrets. When I take a kid to trial to, for them to not really plead, but to say, hey, I did this or I didn't do this, the defense and the prosecution have already talked. There's nothing to hide. So the more that people have that misunderstanding that, oh, Bill was playing games and Bill was hiding this from Anne and all this, Anne already knew. She walked through the same crime scene Bill did. She spoke to the same police that Bill did. She spoke to the same people in white that Bill did. She spoke to the same witnesses that were interviewed as Bill did. She did the same investigation as Bill did, and she had no obligation to fight for anything, but she had to be prepared to take certain things off the table so that it wouldn't look worse on her client if indeed they were going to go to trial. And that's what she was doing. Fair trial, fair trial, fair trial. Well, at this point, do you believe that they would have got a fair trial? I believe that it was as fair as possible. There was just so much media speculation about it that they either ignored it or they were trying to spin it in a way to once again benefit the defendant. So to say that this case was flawed and there was so much wrong with it, that's obviously your own perspective, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you really know the dynamics, if you really have been exposed to the ground level stuff that goes on, it's pretty cut and dry. A crime's committed, the cops are called, they quarantine it off. The investigator, the forensic teams, the DA, and at that point, if they place somebody under arrest for the crime, then the court-appointed attorney or their attorney walked through the scene, and they both see the same thing. That way, if one side is lagging on their part of it, you already know what's coming. You already know what's coming down the pipe. There's no question about it. The defense job is to cause reasonable doubt, not to win the case. In her case, she took the defense stance on saving her client's life, and she succeeded. But now he's wanting to retract certain things that he agreed to, which I don't believe he'll be able to. But I could be wrong. But I hope this makes sense, because there's still a lot of stuff out there that people are holding on to, and there's a lot of nitpicking and cherry picking and all this stuff going on as far as evidentiary value and everything that we're being shown. And you have to understand that what we're being shown is we have hindsight now. This stuff was being collected in real time. So to say that they should have done this, they should have done that, they should have interviewed this person, why did this person have so many inconsistencies? Well, if you've ever interviewed somebody or if you've ever sat down and talked to somebody in an investigative fashion, you do have an understanding that they're more capable of lying to you based on their ability to recall information. That's why they're interviewed more than one time, most of the time, especially eyewitnesses. So to sit there and say that Dylan was the perfect witness or would have been the perfect witness, I don't believe so. And I was going to do the breakdown tonight until I got to listening to it, and I was like, this is insane. I got to sit down and actually listen to this to really gain an understanding of what she's saying. Because she's all over the place with her times, with her recollection. She remembers in detail certain parts very intricately, but when it comes to time, she has no clue at the real time frame of certain things. She was jumping around, but did that mean she's lying? No, it does not mean she's lying. It just means that she didn't have her mind on the time that these events were happening. It's kind of like if somebody were to ask you, okay, 2 days ago, what time did you wake up in the middle of the night to go use the bathroom? Okay, what time was it? I don't know. Do you know exactly to the moment of time? Or can you do an estimate? What did you do? Well, most people are half asleep when they're doing that. So the recollection is going to be very vague, but you can say, well, I went to the bathroom, I came back, and I went back to sleep. But the next time they interview you, you can say, you're going to be like, oh, I got to thinking about it. I didn't go right back to sleep. I went and got me a glass of water or a glass of milk and some cookies. Does that mean that you were lying the first time? No, it doesn't. It just means that's what your mentality had the capacity to understand and remember the first time you're asked about something, because we go into fight or flight on every aspect of what we do during our day, especially if it's something that's traumatic. Going to the bathroom in the middle of the night is not traumatic, and still so many people have very vague recollection. Did you hear any dogs barking? Did you notice anything out of the ordinary? Was there anything in your room that was out of the ordinary? And I'm just using these as examples, and it may or may not clarify certain things. I'm not defending Dylan by no means, but hearing her interview with her attorney, it is just so hard to comprehend, especially with the slang that people use these days. You know what I mean? It's like obviously they use the word totally wrong in the context. So you're trying to understand it. And one of the things that she says a lot is blah, 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 pretty much. So does that mean that, okay, this is factual? Or does that mean that you're only stating up to a particular understanding in your mind. And these are things that are viewed as a lie by certain people. These things are viewed as a person withholding information. But it isn't always the case. Because you have to take into account that most young adults, even as old as she is right now, she's still young. Most people do not have the capacity to put memory into wording. They're used to texting everything they want to say. They're used to using slang. So when you're being interviewed, you can tell that she's not used to communicating more than one thought or two or three per couple minutes. Take the skit that they did on TikTok where they're impersonating each other. They weren't using long sentence structure. They were not. They were using the shortest variation of memory that they recall that was important about their friends. Now, if they were standing up there doing a speech project and they were having to actually articulate their words and understanding of the wording that they were saying, then it would be a different concept. If you asked her at 26, she's going to be able to recall that information based on her life experiences, and hopefully her grammar changes where she can actually tell you in as normal wording as possible exactly what went on. And I agree with you, PKC. I think blah, blah, blah is the new, yeah. So a lot of this is viewed as being deceitful, trying to cover up, and so forth and so forth. And you can hear it in a lot of different people's speeches as they at times, and including myself, do not use the wordings appropriately. Does that mean we're lying or we're trying to be deceitful? No, it means that at that point of reference, we're not in that mindset so clearly that we use the right word. Does that mean we're stupid? Does it mean we're incapable of understanding certain things? No, it does not. It just means that we've gotten comfortable with this sentence structure and we use it whenever we either get nervous or we feel embarrassed to get the control back. There's a lot of people that go on and on and on and on and on and on saying a lot of things, but not really making any point of substance in their communication. And you hear this a lot. Just because you're saying a bunch of stuff or you can recall stuff from memory does not make you an intellectual person, doesn't make you an expert at what you're talking about. So I wanted to get on here and basically give my throw my hat in the ring, so to speak, and give my impression of today's restitution hearing, amongst other things. I may or may not eventually get to Dylan's interview. I'm still deciding whether I can make through the whole 2 hour thing. If I make it through and can kind of make sense of it all without doing it in a live and having to stop and trying to interpret what she's actually saying without getting it wrong or trying to defend her or victimize her, then I'll do it. If not, then I'm not going to do it. So that's why I moved it from today's live to next Monday's. So hopefully we'll get to a point where we do have an understanding of exactly what went on that night. Or we may never. And if we don't, I'm sure this will be a hot topic for a very long time. But regarding Mr. Koberger, he just needs to fade away and go do his time. His 15 minutes are up, and they've been up for a long time. They were up the moment he pled, the moment that he pled, not the moment he was coerced, not the moment he was promised anything, not the moment of anything else, that he basically gave up the rest of his life for the simple fact that he did it. Okay, thank you for that, PKC. She says, I just finished it a while ago. It was very similar to the second interview. And that's another thing. She was interviewed 4 times. So in those 4 times, you're getting the basic. Okay, she said this once already. So she hasn't added or taken away from it. So she said this in this one. So out of those 4, I'm sure they got one particular basic interview from her, which God bless those investigators. Jesus. I don't know if I can get through the 2-hour thing. It's hard to listen to. It really is. It was harder to read it, much less listen to the person saying it. And if you haven't heard it, go take a listen. Let me know what you think in the comments. And thank you so much for those of you that have been here tonight with me. I'm going to put this statement up here by PKC. She said the person doing the interview asked if she kept plants in her window as a warning in case someone tried to sneak in. No, my mom told me they needed light. And that should tell you the mindset of a young adult. And one other thing is they're incapable of making the next move because they're so sheltered in this world. We give them more credit than they really deserve. You know, I have to give directives every day to young people, especially if they're doing community service. One of the things that we do is we have them shred paper. Well, if you don't tell them to bag it up, they'll sit there and shred until that box is full. And then they'll come and tell you, hey, it's not shredding anymore. Then you say, well, did you bag it up? There's a trash bag in there. Bag it up. Okay. So they bag it up. And you can walk in there and there'll be 6 bags bagged up. And you're like, okay, well, you need to go throw these in the dumpster. You know where the dumpster is, right? Yeah. So they go out there and they throw the trash. But if you don't tell them, like today, I walked in there and there's 2 big bags just sitting by the trash can. I didn't tell this individual the other day to go throw the trash. So that should tell you everything you need to know about a young adult. If it's been a while since you raised a young child, a young adult, you do have that understanding that sometimes you have to walk them through every step, or their mind just does not have the capacity to be a problem solver. Their mind has the capacity to cause multitudes of problems. And I'm going to end it here tonight. Y'all have a wonderful night. Y'all have a wonderful rest of the week. Once again, my name is 12 Gauge, and this is my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. Before I go, though, the QR code that you've been seeing up on the corner, that one is for breast cancer awareness, and this one is for the food bank, Feed More. and this one is for the American Heart Association. So if you want to donate to any three of those, feel more than welcome to, because it doesn't come to the channel. It goes directly to the website. So you're not donating to me. You're not donating to the channel. You're donating straight to the website. One more comment. I think you were trying to see just how paranoid she was, since she kept referring to her and Bethany as the scaredy cats of the group, because they were the youngest. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. You have a wonderful evening, and I'll catch you soon. Maestro, cue that music.
They say we living fast, but what they really mean is we're running from something. The streets got stories, cold ones, buried ones, and now here truth don't sleep. I seen good men lose their way, killers turn to ghosts, injustice take too long to answer the call. But this is 12 gauge honest, where every case pleads true. Every file got a heartbeat, and every cold trail still got smoke rising. We talking about living fast, dying young. We're fighting to live right now. Cause legends don't fade. They echo through the evidence, through the crime scenes, through every voice that never got heard. This ain't entertainment, it's real life reloaded. Welcome to 12 gauge industry.